Four disasters, four abilities, but the question is, who stands supreme? What's up guys, so here we are to do a nice little ranking of the four disaster curses techniques. We're going to be ranking them as characters another day, but very specifically their techniques, their abilities, all their powers and their jujutsu, to see who actually stands supreme amongst the four. I guess legally speaking, I guess they kind of are the strongest curses, because Sukuna doesn't count as a curse. None of the other curse users count as curses. And unless you count Shikigami, they'd be like Maharaga. But then again, I guess there's Rika. So at least out of the grouped cursed spirits, I would say this is the strongest group of united cursed spirits, and also kind of like the smartest group of raw curses we see. Even fully manifested Rika, despite being very, very strong, isn't actually the most intelligent. Meanwhile, all four of the disaster curses can actually hold conversations. So and then we gotta give this credit as the strongest group of curses, even if none of them are top 10 anymore. Not a single one of them. They've all been power crept. But honestly, let's not waste any more time and let's hop right into number 4. What's up guys, that guy with a pencil here. Fun fact, I do happen to have it on me and keep it on me at all times. And another fun fact, Jogo. I hate to do it to you, my big one-eyed boy, but I gotta slide you right down to the bottom in terms of overall curse technique. Now, let me clarify, because I know people are already going to be like, what? How dare you place Disaster Flames at the bottom of this list in terms of abilities? It is clearly the most mighty, the most devastating, the most innately powerful and destructive of all the abilities on this list. And to that I say, yeah, in terms of raw power, you really don't beat this. Especially with the ultimate of the technique, the Maximum Meteor, if you just take this one statement at face value, you take this one statement from Sukuna, and you just interpret it in the way where Jogo says, even Sukuna must have suffered damage, or suffered some damage from that. And Sukuna goes, if it hit. If you go with that as Sukuna just agreeing with Jogo, oh yeah, you actually would have been able to scratch me or something if you hit me with that, that's a better feat than anybody else on this list shows. Anybody. Even the strongest technique on this list has shown complete uselessness up against Sukuna. So, Maximum Meteor alone, which isn't even the strongest part of the technique, the strongest part of the technique would happen to be its domain expansion, Iron of the Coffin Mountain, or Coffin of the Iron Mountain. That would be the apex, the pinnacle, the next level of this technique. Meaning in terms of overall raw juice, raw power, raw ability, all that, there is nothing on this list that transcends Disaster Flames. It stands unrivaled at the pinnacle, the peak of the mountain, even if that mountain is of the Iron Mountain. So, you may be wondering, okay, if it's literally the strongest, why is it at the bottom, Pencil Man? And to that I say, what else does it really do? Let's do a quick review of what Jogo's abilities actually are with Disaster Flames. He has his domain expansion. We unfortunately never get to see the sure hit of this. A lot of people conflate this as the sure hit of Jogo's domain, oh, well, it's just the meteor, right? And then, domains are stated to have sure hits, so this must be the sure. Now, it isn't. It's stated in external materials that this is just a technique of being deployed by Jogo in the domain in an attempt to hit Gojo. That doesn't mean that it's actually a sure hit. Gege clarifies this outside. So we never actually see the sure hit of Coffin of the Iron Mountain, and this is the only time we see the domain in the series. So, that's on 4. But in the domain, he can summon meteors, and presumably, his sure hit has something to do with fire, or maybe lava, just based on how the rest of the technique works. Then, of course, we have the natural, juicy, most scrumdiddlyumptious ability that could damage even Roman Sukuna himself, Maximum Meteor. This is just a gigantic rock that drops on things and is on fire and would do extreme lethal damage to most things if it hit. The main weakness with this one, though, if I had to say, man, it's kind of slow. Especially considering you can make really solid arguments that Jogo should be the fastest of the Disaster Curses by a long run. It's pretty embarrassing that his penultimate technique is, so slow that when Sukuna's holding people back to, the last second, characters as useless as Panda, as goated as Kusakabe. I'll give Kusakabe this. Kusakabe's goated. He literally reacts to a Maximum Uzumaki not 10 chapters after this. He's goated. I want on Kusakabe. He's clearly built different. But you got Panda and 2 randoms being able to dodge this at the last second. That's just a thing that can happen. That's just a thing that transpires. he just whiffs. He doesn't hit a single one of them. It's not even like we see burn marks on anybody or like someone got grazed by it. No, this massive, destructive, crazy technique was entirely whiffed. Like, to the point of absolute, like, I don't even know how they dodged it. Like, considering how fast Jogo's supposed to be. But no, it was dodged. And Sukuna very explicitly did wait up until the last second to and let them leave. So, Maximum Meteor, extremely powerful, but very, very slow, unfortunately. And then, of course, like I said, we just don't know the sure hit of this domain. And by the time Jogo may have gone to activate it, well, the Limited Void happened, and we saw what happened with that. And then we do have just the ability to light things on fire. This does come from either just being in Jogo's presence or just straight contact. Like, we see he smacks in the general vicinity of Gojo, because we know he doesn't actually hit Gojo here, but he smacks in the general vicinity of Gojo and immediately lights his head up, starts to toast him up a little bit, and then on making contact with Jogo, see, I'm going to mix up their names throughout this entire thing, because this is mainly the best example we see of Disaster Flames. Every other usage of it later is kind of not entirely worthless. I'm not going to say it's that, but it's not like too crazy. But he can touch you, boom, lights you on fire. And of course, you have the whole interactions that he has with his sonic bugs, his buggy boys, where he can release different creatures. Actually, wait, now, before we actually get into that, I do want to talk about his ability to spawn volcanoes. This is actually really, really good. The ability to just, from anywhere, spawn volcanoes, which release massive bursts of lava, or just flames and energy in general, is very, very impressive, because notably, it doesn't seem to require anything else. Like, he can just, and then, boom, there's a volcano, which will launch out extreme lethal amounts of damage, which is very, very, very good. I ain't even gonna knock it. Just being able to spawn volcanoes like that is fantastic. Usually in other series, characters of the earthbending variety, like Jogo, would probably require like an actual source, or at least like a direct connection to the ground or something. But no, he spawns this volcano like out of the side of a wall that most certainly is not connected to the Earth's core, and spits out hot magma that's able to melt what seems to be like straight up concrete. So very, very impressive. And all this is still in combination with other unique abilities, like, who knows, I don't know, maybe his Juicy Bit of Bugs, which are able to come in and cook in certain ways, which Jogo himself is typically unable to do, just due to the fact that he's, I hate to say it, but he's Jogo. He's never really allowed to cook in the entire series. And as cool and as amazing as he is, it's just, he doesn't get much. And the big reason, because you may be wondering, okay, Pencil, you're just covering a whole bunch of different things on why this should be higher. Not the worst thing here. It kind of sucks in terms of everything else but destruction. You know what I mean? Like, notably, Disaster Flames doesn't give Jogo himself any extra durability. Like, sure, he's normally hot to be around, but despite being in the presence of he was in the presence of normal people and then lit them all on fire. But anyone, from characters with as little cursed energy as Maki to characters as much cursed energy, as much cursed energy as Nanami and stuff like that, they need to be explicitly lit on fire. Like, he needs to actually light them up. They are not automatically burned in his presence. And also, if things did automatically burn in his presence, that would make it even worse in terms of a general utility front. And a big thing is, we don't really see him spawn things that, like, don't immediately produce magma or lava or fire or something very, very dangerous to any allies he's supposedly fighting with, or would be fighting with. That means that Jogo kind of can't work with other people very, very well, unless they are also immune to fire and or earth and stuff like that. But then you just start stacking multiple Jogos. The big advantage that a lot of the other techniques on this list will have is that not only are they good on a destructive front, not only do they have multiple types of utility and ability in different ways that other techniques simply can't muster, and also they do have utility with other people and can be used for more than just straight destruction. That's the biggest weakness of Jogo. The only thing he can do is destroy. And don't get me wrong, like, definitely within the context of most of his opponents, like, yeah, the Coffin of the Iron Mountain, extreme amounts of heat and lava and constant devastation and destruction, to the point where it's basically impossible to dodge the large scale of his attacks as he literally lights things on massive bursts of fire. All this, fantastic. The ability of his explosive sound bugs that release massive amounts of high frequency energy that even cause Gojo Satoru to shiver in his boots. And then on top of that, they just straight up explode. Like, good stuff. Good stuff. Can't use that with anyone else. Can't use that in any other purpose in life. The anime goes on to extend it a little bit. It gives Disaster Flames the ability to create lava constructs and, like, slam things together. And also, it gives the bugs, like, the ability to carry Jogo around and allow him to fly. And while those abilities are neat, Not only do other curses have abilities that can either mimic what Jogo does, but with less destruction and more utility on other factors, but also Dagon can kind of just fly. Like, Hanami can just stand on their wooden balls. Mahito can literally grow wings. Like, every single thing that Disaster Flame does, even if it has less potency in terms of other techniques, it doesn't have any sort of external utility outside of straight destruction. At least it's never shown it because of all of Jogo's encounters, and that is what puts it at the bottom of the list for me. I'm sorry, I just don't see any use for Disaster Flames outside of combat, and even within combat, it doesn't add any defensive utility. It doesn't necessarily increase Jogo's speed. We never seen him, like, propel himself with explosive fire. It doesn't seem to have anything on a utility front at all, other than, like, maybe Flight with Bugs, which you can emit, well, yeah, you can pretty much imitate it with any other of the techniques on this list. So unfortunately, I'm going to put Disaster Flames at the bottom due to slowness in terms of its penultimate technique, a lack of information on the pinnacle of the technique, and an overall lack of general utility. But of course, if it's number 4, what could be number 3? I know y'all are going to look at me funny. Alright, I get it. I know you're like, really, Pencil? Really? Dagon's technique? And I know. It seems blasphemous, it seems ludicrous, it seems just a little bit insane, but in the wise words of many other men, I need y'all to hear me out. So the thing about Dagon's technique in particular is that it is one of the most explored variations of all the techniques, except for one that you're probably thinking of. And the reason I say this is because we actually get to see pretty much everything Dagon has to offer in their admittedly very limited amount of screen time. And with that being the case, I have to overall put it above Disaster Flames, mainly for one thing and one thing only, and it's the fact that we actually get to see the domain expansion and see what it is actually meant to do. Notably, we've seen this domain expansion a whole bunch before Dagon's Awakening and proper battle with everybody, able to say, everybody's favorite casting crew, but outside of, like, well, I guess Maki and Nanami are pretty well loved, but, like, I like Nobito. How many people actually like Nobito? With that being the case, we actually do get to see this domain quite often before this point, but this is obviously the battle where it really shines. We get to actually see its sure hit effect, and that alone kind of puts it above Disaster Flames for me, because we actually understand what this does, and what it does is actually very, very useful in every single context. Number 1, infinite food. Can you imagine? An endless stream of Shikigami? I know they taste like cursed energy, but they probably taste pretty good if you fry them up the right way. But in reality, the abilities of Dagon kind of have a softer variation of Disaster Flames, but as a byproduct come with more defensive utility, general utility, and overall diversity and flexibility in ability. And let's talk about why. Number 1, water is just real nice to have. 1, because it's not instantaneously lethal in case you're fighting with somebody else. Like, if you're fighting alongside Jogo, and he, like, grazes you with Maximum Meteor, you're burning alive. If you're fighting alongside Dagon, and he grazes you with some water, I mean, depending on the speed it's moving at, water can be just as lethal as hitting concrete, depending on how fast you hit it, but still, it's much less inherently lethal than, I don't know, an entire wall of fire. Multiple walls of fire. Or maybe a burning hot rock. So obviously, on a overall general utility, water's a whole lot safer. Number 2, water's still very hindering, and can still be used to very good effect, considering the quantities that Dagon can summon it in. Notably, with this one water spear alone, he manages to pretty much flood the entire area to the point where Maki needs to leap up into the air, and Naobito has to start summoning frames upon frames upon frames in order to take away a bunch of the water that Dagon spawned. And notably, Dagon never really seemed to spawn the water again. This was just one opening attack. It seems like, based on how casually they do it, they can just boom, 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 and then they drown the entire area in water, which does allow for fantastic control of the environment without I hate to say it, without innately destroying the environment in a similar way to Jogo. You get the environmental control, and yet you do get the raw damage, as we do get to see. The overall water does seem to have effects that allow Dagon to manipulate it after its release, which is very good, and it leads to things like this defensive water wheel, which allows him to defend himself on top of his own innate bulk, which comes with Dagon. That's a discussion for another time. But this water shield is actually very durable, to the point where even the characters present kind of can't allow Dagon to maintain it without innately jumping him. Without innately jumping him because of how potent this water shield is. They all need to strike it before they can strike Dagon. And notably, once again, we just don't know how many of these water shields he can make and how much water he could actually fuel into them, considering this is Dagon's first actual fight. Like, Jogo has experience. He's fought a couple times before. He knows the general breadth of his abilities. Dagon's experimenting, throwing things out for the first time ever. Sure, it understood its domain expansion and was using that passively, but this is the first time it's actually in battle and starting to use its techniques. And we see with Hanami, that's a very difficult thing to do at first. When you haven't been used to battle and you're suddenly faced with intense conflict, you start to evolve and grow. And we see that Dagon, once again, just due to their inexperience, isn't actually able to do all too well against the onslaught, but still, the defensive utility provided by his water shield, being able to resist swings from Maki, presumably, I'm just going to assume, ratio technique strikes from Nanami, and even punches from Naobito that admittedly do start to breach the defenses, you see it punching through the water, is still very, very impressive. Top that off with Dagon's ability to levitate. I'm not sure where this comes from, though. Like, I'm not sure if that's just, like, a cursed spirit thing, or, like, a disaster water thing. Just based on the fact that we don't see every cursed spirit innately fly, I'm going to assume this is just a byproduct of disaster water. It's one of his abilities, meaning that what Jogo needs an entire bug to start doing, like a bug on his back in order to start flying, which is an anime-only thing, in the manga, Dagon can just fly, which is very, very nice. It's just an extra bit of utility. You can kind of just leave. Notably, Naobito calls it levitation. He says, "Oh, right, that's right. You can levitate. Well, I try to flee up high too." But no, this does just appear to be straight up flight. Like, I don't know. Dagon can just seem to float in midair, and this trend continues into the main showing of Dagon. Though, admittedly, there's one little detail that I do like, and I do want to give highlight to, but this is a Dagon exclusive thing, not necessarily a disaster water thing, but considering Dagon is still a user of disaster water, I guess this is kind of just a perk that's built in. Dagon doesn't actually need hands to open his domain expansion. Like, he can kind of just make the symbol on his belly, and bada bing, bada boom, you're trapped in a domain. Where a lot of characters kind of lose access to domain if you ever rip off their hands, or break their arms, or shatter their fingers. Dagon, as long as a belly is attacked, or they have, not attacked, but intact, and they have their hands still, then they're able to open domain in two separate ways, which is very, very useful. And also, you know, their domain, which we actually get to see the effects of. Not only is it a massive battleground, which Dagon has complete control over, in comparison to other domains, which are actually kind of tiny when you look at them, but also we actually get the sure hit confirmation of what the Horizon of the Captivating Skanda has to offer with Death Swarm. And the thing with Death Swarm is, right, once again, it is inherently less lethal than something like Maximum Meteor. It is most likely inherently less lethal than even this just random meteor that comes out that Jogo, well, see, Jogo, it's Gojo, that Gojo just one-taps with his fist. It's inherently less lethal, but still, I'd say Death Swarm is a pretty solid ability in of itself, to the point where we see characters who have anti-domain techniques ignore Nanami. For some reason, his dumb behind self did not decide to learn an anti-domain technique literally after running into Mahito, knowing he was likely going to run into Mahito again one day. So I don't know why he didn't learn Simple Domain. Bro, stupid. So we don't know how Simple Domain matches up against Death Swarm. But we do get to see that even anti-domain techniques like Falling Blossom Emotion get consistently overwhelmed by Death Swarm. It's just an endless stream of Shikigami, as Dagon themselves completely describes, due to the nature of the sea being the source of life. Which means that Death Swarm, when concentrated, will overwhelm most anti-domain techniques, presumably. Because if it's just targeted by Cursed Energy, which what every single domain seems to target explicitly, it's why Dagon is unable to attack Toji, on top of, you know, Megami interfering and deleting the sure hit, but it's also why Maki and Toji, once Maki's awakened, and Toji in general, are immune to domains, because they target Cursed Energy. Even a Simple Domain user, just based on how Simple Domain is stated to operate, would most likely have their domain literally eaten alive by Shikigami, and then have themselves eaten alive by Shikigami. So, Death Storm is actually a really, really good sure hit. And another thing about the sure hit, in comparison to other sure hits, is that sure hit, I see what it does, but sure, it does not have the innate lethality, but still, you are not just being swarmed by a bunch of Shikigami, but also Dagon is one of the few who actually just seems to stack on attacks consistently with their natural innate sure hit. We see him combo Naobito when Naobito's starting to resist, even though Naobito's running low on cursed energy and is not able to maintain flowing blossom motion regardless. Dagon likely doesn't even need to interfere, but the fact that he can interfere on top of his domain sure hit is great. It allows for extra pressure, extra force, and just due to the nature of the massive swarm of cursed energy that's consistently attacking you, it allows for Dagon to also kind of just gank you in a sense where you probably wouldn't be able to perceive him because of how much cursed energy your senses are being overwhelmed by anyway, which is very, very good. And we see that even when Dagon is forced to split up his domain potency, he does actually do real decent amounts of damage to his opponents regardless of the fact that he split it up. We see that Dagon... You know what? There's a joke that I was about to make, but something my lawyer told me not to do it, so I won't. But we see that Nanami does still take a pretty decent heft of damage, even though he took a minor part of Death Swarm, and Naobito lost an entire arm, which was a massive nerf for Naobito. And that's very, very good. Because remember, he had to divert, he had to split the focus of Death Swarm, meaning if he were to just target that whole hog at somebody, he would be able to overwhelm them with who knows how many Shikigami at once. Consistent sure hits, and that's very, very good. And once again, just the general utility, right? Because sure, all this is impressive, but presumably Coffin of the Iron Mountain would have one-tapped all these sorcerers, because it would have a hotter, more dangerous, and likely more viable sure hit. Yeah, absolutely wonderful, true, facts, don't matter though. Because we don't actually know what Coffin of the Iron Mountain does with its ability and its sure hit. But we know Dagon's. And we know Dagon's just has general utility too. One of the biggest things that I would want in a technique is the ability to use it not just actively for damage in combat, just passively. And we know this entire domain, Horizon of the Captivating Skanda, is very explicitly used as the main base of operations for our evil cast and crew in the early series, which means it's just a nice place to hang out. If you're wondering, that was the deciding factor that put it above Disaster Flames. Not just the fact that you don't need to inherently harm your allies, not just the fact that we have a confirmed sure hit, not just the fact that it has a domain expansion of itself, but the fact that you can chill out with the homies inside your domain expansion. I wish I had better reasoning to put it above Disaster Flames, but I think that in of itself is good enough. The freedom and flexibility and the environmental control that's not innately damaging that comes with Disaster Water, plus the sure hit effect of the domain, plus an effective domain and multiple ways to open it, plus the ability to fly, plus the overwhelming amount of Shikigami, and the fact that you could have an infinite Shikigami buffet, all of this makes Disaster Water just a little bit better than Disaster Flames. They're close, and I can definitely see someone putting Disaster Flames over just due to its sheer destructive power, but overall, thanks to the diversity, the safety, and the utility of all the Disaster Water abilities, I'm going to have to put it at number 3. But of course, that leaves the question of, what's number 2? You know what time it is. I gotta give praise to Mother Nature, because it's time to talk about disaster plants. Despite sounding, I hate to say it, but the dumbest of all the names, like Disaster Flames, sounds pretty mellow. Disaster Water, a little bit funky, but Disaster Plants, really, Gaga? You can come with any other name. But with that being the case, Disaster Plants is really, really good, because it kind of takes aspects of the 2 previous abilities that we've already talked about, and the utility of the 3rd ability on this list, yet adds extra things and extra usages that put it above the first 2 in spite of not even knowing what the domain's name is. I know that's going to be a big point for a lot of people to be like, Pencil, how could you dare declare that something of this low caliber, something with no domain expansion, could be so good? Let's actually break it down. Number 1, Hanami just has like real good environmental control, like to absurd degrees. Number 1, they have these ability to spawn these massive wooden balls that have multiple utility. One, Hanami can kind of just fly on them. We never see Hanami themselves like actually fly freeform like Dagon does or levitate, but we do see Hanami stand on the balls, and hey, standing on business, standing on balls, they kind of work out. Not only that, these balls do have the ability to release attacks at massive ranges that do lethal amounts of damage because they kind of just pierce you. Once again, very good. And another thing, same issue I have with Disaster Flames, that Disaster Water Rectified and ultimately Disaster Plants stacks on top of, Disaster Plants is not inherently lethal if you are fighting with somebody else. Disaster Plants actually allows for more utility with other people based on the nature of disaster plants relative to a lot of the other cursed abilities. We see very specifically that disaster plants has legendary control over the environment. In an instant, this mass of forest and wood and stabby stabs are all formed just like that. And then in the same instant, the moment Hanami feels like those aren't useful anymore, immediately despawns them. Because they're simply constructs of cursed energy. And sure, presumably the water in Disaster Water is also a construct of cursed energy. Presumably the fire and lava and rock in Disaster Flames is also a construct of cursed energy. But we don't ever see the other two just make and disappear. They're able to spawn it quite quickly, but they aren't able to despawn it quite quickly. And in a verse where flight isn't actually all too common, like, I think there are 10 characters total in Jujutsu Kaisen who can fly unassisted. And even then, like, 2 of those characters in Maki and Toji, and I guess 3 legally in Sukuna, they kind of cheat by hopping off the air. They don't really fly. So the ability to kind of just drag your opponent into the air and lock down their mobility options like this by controlling the environment and then leading into a setup that would have worked on literally anybody else except for Todo, and, well, not anybody else, you know. There are numerous other characters who could dodge the setup. But still, the setup that's allowed with Disaster Plants that kind of naturally combos into itself, fantastic. The wooden balls allowing for Hanami to maintain air movement. I was about to say air momentum, but technically it deletes all air momentum. But Hanami being able to maintain their spot in the air while attacking simultaneously as their opponents fall after they make this entire environment, fantastic. The fact that they can use this environment to not just support themselves in their own mobility and momentum, but also use this to support their allies is also really, really good. Because essentially, it could allow for the utilization of speed that your opponent or your ally would not be expecting, and allows them, your ally in particular, to reach out with certain attacks. Hypothetically, maybe if someone had Idle Transfiguration and they started going crazy, they would appreciate the support of a Disaster Plants user, because they essentially would allow their opponent to be entrapped for an easy grab. They would allow for easy setups, easy blocking of certain setups by the nature and speed of the plants constructing and deconstructing, all fantastic. And there are also just like little unique abilities that Hanami has that honestly make them a bit better just based on how the Jujutsu world naturally functions. Like these, the cursed buds that pop right on out and do the slurpy slurp on people, are actually really, really good. To like a weird point that we never see them again, but it makes sense why we never see them again, because the moment we get to see them again, it's kind of, I'm not going to say too late, but in the sense that Hanami fought Gojo. And they were never ever landing those cursed buds on Gojo. But the ability to take advantage of a sorcerer's main defensive strat, which is reinforcing their bodies with cursed energy, with these buds that seem to be able to pierce through, and if not, simply absorb cursed energy even on contact, fantastic. It essentially makes it so your opponent is defenseless no matter what. Because either A, they need to reinforce themselves with cursed energy, which will automatically be drinking. How do you say that? Would it be drank? I guess just drank. Your opponent either needs to reinforce themselves with cursed energy, which will be consumed naturally by the plant itself over time, draining more and more of their strength and stamina, and or they need to turn off their cursed energy, which leaves them liable to another series of attacks from you. And the moment they turn their cursed energy back on, as long as that bud is in there, bada bing, bada boom, it's going to keep growing. And notably, Hanami was kind of slick with the amount of buds that they pulled out here, but we see against Todo and Yuji, they're kind of able to go just a little bit crazy, just a little bit buku bonkers with the amount of buds they release, to the point where they straight up pull out like a whole group of them, like a massive amount of the buds, to the point where it gets a little, oh wait, nope, not that. We're going to talk about that in a second. But it gets a bit ludicrous with how many buds get pulled out. Like, look at this entire thing. This entire gigantic series of cursed buds that could be launched out at any direction and consume the cursed energy of whatever Hanami desires. So you either need to turn off your cursed energy and take lethal damage from Hanami's other attacks, or you leave your cursed energy on and have it drinking up by these juicy little cursed buds. The only reason Todo is able to like deal with it is mainly because, one, Hanami's battling experience, and two, for the fact that Hanami's being pressed by somebody else. In a one-on-one, if these cursed buds come out and you don't have a way to either dodge them, destroy them as they come at you, and or just not interact with them at all, like Gojo, then you are kind of messed up, because you now have to deal with the fact that they drain your cursed energy. And Hanami can keep pressing you. And with that being the case, I think this is really, really good. Like, all darn near underrated for disaster plans. And the final thing, the final most smoothest and butteriest thing that I'm going to have to give disaster plans that puts it above disaster water and above disaster flames would have to be this right here. The ability to just erase battle intent and catch characters much, much, much stronger than Hanami themselves off guard, like this, and just instantly. Like, notably, Gojo does dodge it. Like, he does avoid it. But even still, he's immediately under its effects. The flower field that just erases the will to fight. Very, very good. And honestly, this alone could be set up into anything else. Like, oh, the vibes. They're hit them with cursed buds. Are they reinforcing themselves with cursed energy? Up. Good. They're pierced and now being drained. Up. Are they not reinforcing themselves with cursed energy? Pierce them with one of the wooden balls. Up. Are they standing there now completely liable and open to attack? Yeah. Remember, Disaster Plants just has the ability to slurp up massive amounts of cursed energy and launch them off in a gigantic laser from the eye stalk, or I guess like the eye bud that's on Hanami. He just has a laser. Like, if one of your issues with Disaster Plans is like, oh, well, you know, the wood and the stuff like that isn't actually really all too potent in terms of piercing and stuff like that. Even the buds, all them, you know, that's not really too... Yeah, he can just hit you with a laser. Because I guess, like, why not? You can just do it. And that's another thing that covers for the attack potency issues that may come from the rest of the Disaster Plans. If you think the piercing isn't actually that good, no matter how sharp or quickly they can become or pierce you with, the massive laser is really, really good. And I would give points to the domain expansion, but, like, I can't. We don't even know its name. We never see it. Like, at least for Coffin of the Iron Mountain, we get a name, and we get to see it, and we see some of the Jujutsu being used inside of it. But, like, we can make no assumptions about Hanami's domain, so we just never see it. But still, I think the ability to erase slaughtering intent, the ability to use it alongside your companions without having to worry about harming them drastically like Disaster Flames, the ability to control the environment to such massive degrees and scales that allows for complete dominance over a location that can manipulate the entire scale of the battlefield and its shape and size and its danger level at any moment, on top of the ability to manifest a pseudo variation of flight, the ability to drain curse energy, the most common defensive resource in the entire series, and just turn off, remember, flat out turn off the ability to make your opponents want to fight, even if your opponents are much, 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 much stronger than you, as we see Gojo is than Hanami later on in their next encounter. I think I have to give Hanami just one of the most complete kits. It's one of the most complete, despite being very, very incomplete. No maximum, no domain, no nothing, but still. The ability and destruction and the power and the control that comes from Disaster Plans is so good, it has to be number 2. But you know, I know you know, that I know that you know, that we know what number 1 is. Let's not waste any more time. So let's hop right into it. I mean, come on now. Like, you know, I like to drop a hot take here or there. You know, I'm a guy who has some unpopular opinions. You know, a little bit of here, a little bit of there. But, like, the moment you clicked on this video, you knew. I think I knew that you knew that I knew that we knew that Idol Transfiguration had to be number 1. I mean, like, in a way, it basically does everything that the other techniques do, but with, like, more hacks. Because the one thing about all these other abilities, the one thing about Disaster Flames, the one thing about Disaster Water, we'll talk about you another day, young man. But the one thing about Disaster Water, and even the thing about Disaster Plants, all these amazing next level abilities that come from the rest of the Disaster Curses, the thing is, they're all kind of just raw power based. It's like, how hard can I hit you? How hard can I slobber knock you? And one big issue is when you run into all these different characters who could maybe just face tank lava, who could face tank plants, who could face tank water. But the thing, the juicy Scrimdalimps's thing about Idol Transfiguration is that, yeah, you can tank it once or twice, maybe thrice or twice, or if you're Sukuna, forever. But, like, you can tank it, but even still, the thing is, can you out-tank Mahito, though? Because a big, juicy, scrumdiddlyumptious fact about Mahito is that the man basically cannot fall. Forget all these other things that come with it. Forget all of that. The main thing that Mahito offers is that he is fundamentally not just, I wouldn't say just the bulkiest, but he's so bulky, so juicy, so scrumdiddlyumptious in terms of his overall girth that the man's basically impossible to execute, though admittedly this becomes more possible later in the series. There's some characters who can just perceive the soul, like Gojo Satoru can perceive the soul, Maki and Toji can perceive the soul. Characters who are infused with another being can see souls. Like Hana will not necessarily see souls, they kind of understand the contours and naturally attack it. This is why Yuji was a natural predator. This is why Hana would be a natural predator. This is why pretty much any Culling Game reincarnate would be able to actually damage Mahito with their abilities, because they are subconsciously perceiving, and this byproduct of it, subconsciously attacking the soul. All that, very, very good, very, very nice, makes Mahito not top 10 by the end of the series. But the other issue is that even with the ability to attack the soul, with Mr. Natural Predator over here, Mahito going up against Yuji Itadori, it doesn't matter. At least not to the point where it's actually an extreme weakness. It just makes Mahito like everybody else. Oh, you can actually now damage him down a bit. You can actually damage him down a bit, because Mahito's innate durability that comes from such amazing bulk, from the fact that most characters wouldn't actually be able to harm him, is the number one thing that puts it kind of above everything else immediately. The fact that you can damage Jogo just by hitting him, you can damage Dagon just by hitting him, you can damage Hanami just by hitting them hard enough, you can hit Mahito pretty darn hard, and unless you like atomize him with your hits, unless you hitting that soul, dog, you ain't doing any damage. That's the defensive utility that innately comes with Idle Transfiguration, which is fantastic. The next thing that comes from Idle Transfiguration is, this could sound awful, environmental control. We see this very well used by Mahito. By just manipulating the souls of living beings, he's able to create massive things that are able to throw off, control, block off, and turn the environment into basically whatever he wants. We literally see him block off an entire subway tunnel through the utilization of one cursed transfigured human. This is the one weakness though, like, it's really, really good because of that, but you kind of have to be a little insane, a little nuts, a little cuckoo bonkers in order to wield the technique to full efficiency, because like you kind of just have to not care about human life. And I know there definitely is no issue for Mahito, which is why in this ranking I didn't put that against it. And the thing is, even with Mahito, you can kind of use this freely to your advantage depending on how you work with it. Because remember, Mahito can produce clones, like fully functioning clones too. The only thing that the clones cannot do or use the innate technique of Mahito himself on other people, but they can manipulate their own shape, form, size, body structure, and while they are definitely weaker than the original, that means you could hypothetically just create multiple clones of yourself and manipulate them, as you can produce endless amounts of flesh. We even see Mahito fully admit that he can kind of just become giant at any way, shape, and or form if he really feels like it. The only reason he doesn't do it against Yuji Itadori is because Yuji Itadori is a genuine threat to him, and thusly turning himself into a gigantic target by increasing his size would just make him a bigger target and make him easier to hit and easier to wear down. But against other opponents, he can kind of just become massive. He can reform his body into any shape he needs, whether it be into specific weaponry that he could use against his opponents, such as blades or blunt objects. He's able to manipulate his size. Well, I mentioned the size. He can manipulate the shape of his soul to the point where he can enhance his speed, enhance his strength, his durability. All this allows for so much more flexibility than any of the previous curse techniques have in terms of self-manipulation and as a byproduct, other people manipulation. Because the biggest selling point about Transfiguration is the fact that unless your name's Yuji Itadori, and maybe like Gojo Satoru maybe, you get touched, and that soul is going to wiggle, and it's going to jiggle. And if you get touched again, it'll wiggle and jiggle a little bit more. And 3 or 4 times, just a few, think about it, a few interactions in a basic hand-to-hand fight with Mahito, and you're likely to form. To the point where you ain't fighting no more. This is even to the point where Mahito, while only activating his domain for 0.2 seconds against a person who's at darn near full soul health, with that being the case, all that aside, he's still able to immediately activate his technique on Todo, shut it down in time so he doesn't have to deal with the effects of Sukuna chilling inside of Itadori and force Todo to remove his arm as it gets transfigured and literally explodes. For 0.2 seconds. That's all the contact that Mahito had against admittedly a damaged Todo, likely maybe an 80% soul Todo, but Mahito was at like 40. Bro had taken extreme damage, extreme numbers, and he was still able to one-tap Todo's soul like this. Or nearly one-tap him and force Todo to immediately slash off his hand. Now imagine a full, uninterrupted self-embodiment of perfection. Imagine the kind of soul damage you could do then. Imagine the kind of damage you could force out then. And then you start stacking all the different numerous attacks you can perform with the numerous idle transfigured humans. Due to the nature of Jujutsu Kaisen, we never really get to see Mahito actually have a proper jumping one-on-one when he's near his full potential. But even still, what he does when he gets into scenarios close to this by manipulating the souls of other people like this, it's crazy. It does numbers. And once again, all the blocking and redirection and avoiding of Itadori's attacks doesn't matter against most people because he wouldn't actually have to worry about it. To the point where Todo's basically a non-factor outside of his ability to support Itadori throughout this entire encounter. Put Mahito in numerous 1v1s against all the other disaster curses with their ability to control the environment, with their drastic spatial control, with their high levels of damage, and unless they fight for literally days on end to try and run Mahito out of his cursed energy, all it takes is one domain, one little bit of juice, and boom, they're cooked. And once again, he only opened a 0.2 second domain because of Sukuna. Against almost any other character, he can go full out on a domain and just go absolutely crazy against them. With his curse technique, that's basically unblockable. Just based on the complexity of self-embodiment of perfection and the byproduct complexity of idle transfiguration, this would most likely bypass things like domain amplification, bypass something like simple domain, bypass something like, well, definitely bypass Falling Blossom Motion, just because of how complex it is, considering it directly interacts with the soul. So the ability to directly attack the soul, the ability to control the environment through the manipulation of other souls, the ability to, if not one-tap, because we rarely, if ever, see him one-tap any competent sorcerer, but being able to pretty much low tap, low count, maybe at most 5 tap any decent opponent for Mahito, and the ability to activate a domain expansion that is inherently lethal to all those who come in contact with it, except for one guy. I gotta give Mahito number 1. It's too simple, too clean, too fantastic. I literally can't even think of a way to improve the technique other than, like, have Mahito being able to idle transfigure the moment you come in contact with him. That's it. Otherwise, this technique is literally just fantastic in every way, shape, and form, and might as well be perfect. However, that's what I think the ranking of the 4 disaster curses and their abilities are. What do you guys think, though? Do you guys think you would shift the ranking around a little bit? Do you think I underplayed some characters? Do you think I overplayed some characters? Please let me know all that and more in the comment section down below. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to leave a like, share, comment, and subscribe. And make sure that notification bell so you don't miss out on any videos I come to the channel. Also, I do happen to have a Patreon down below where you can support me for as low as $1 a month. Things like exclusive videos, early content, and more. You also now become a member of the channel for as low as $3 a month to get the same perks and more. Some of those perks include the live reaction to the very next chapter of Jujutsu Kaisen. Now, thank you so much for watching once again, and I hope you guys have psych! Now this is going to be a real test for some of y'all. I got full through it. I want to see. I'm actually going to be super interested to see how y'all get this password. Leave disaster soul. Leave disaster soul in the comment section down below if you've made it all the way to the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching once again, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. This is Dago the Pencil, writing off. I'd like to give a thank you to our $3 members, Recliner Plays, Red Wolf 4765, Greyhound, and Akid's Void. And I'd like to give another thank you to our $5 patrons, Victor, Sean, Midnight Gemlord, Kevin, DemXLND, and Igneal. And I'd like to give a chunky old thank you to our $7 member, Autumn's Morning Lazo. And I'd like to give another chunka thank you to our $10 patrons, Robbie Uchio, Joaquin, Idemokami, and China Doll 09. I'd like to give a tractor thank you to our $25 member, Alex Ice Rose. I'd like to give another giga gargantuan thank you to our $25 patron, Calvin Elder.